In a quiet town, Officer Ben Lawson's life takes an unexpected turn after the loss of his wife leaves him hollow, drifting through each day. But one late-night call leads him to 6 young sisters, orphaned and alone. A chance encounter that will upend everything he thought he knew about family. As he steps into a world of struggle, sacrifice, and unexpected love, Ben discovers that sometimes family is found in the most unlikely of places. Officer Ben Lawson was a fixture in his small town, a quiet, dependable figure patrolling familiar streets. He was known for his steady gaze, a nod of respect, and the way he quietly handled difficult situations. But behind that calm exterior lay a heart fractured by loss. Ben had married his high school sweetheart, Emily. She was his compass, his steady warmth, and his anchor. But fate had other plans, and after years of happiness, she fell ill and passed away, leaving Ben adrift. Though he'd poured himself into work, patrolling late hours and taking on extra shifts, the house he came home to every night felt hollow. It wasn't just Emily's absence. It was the silence, the feeling of emptiness he could never escape. One evening, Ben received a call. A soft rain was falling as he drove to the address, a part of town he rarely patrolled. The dispatcher had said only, "Family emergency." Pulling up to a modest, worn-down house, he noticed the lights were out. Caution flared in his mind, but something deeper, an instinct, a tug, drew him forward. Inside, the air was still and cold. He called out, and faint sounds responded from the far end of the hallway. As he approached, he found a small group of young girls huddled together, eyes wide and frightened. The oldest, barely a teenager, tried to shield the others. They were young, so young, and there was an undeniable sadness in their eyes that stirred something within Ben. After a moment, the details came out. Their parents had passed away, leaving them with no family, no shelter, and no place to call home. The responsibility of the world had fallen suddenly on these small shoulders, and they looked at him as though he might have the answers. He was just a stranger, but in that moment, the weight of their silent plea shattered his loneliness. The youngest girl, barely old enough to understand, clung to the older sister's side. Ben knew that his role as a police officer meant he would need to report this, that the system would take over. But for the first time in years, he felt something spark within him. A need, a calling stronger than duty. Ben would have to decide. The home he returned to every night may have been empty, but perhaps, tonight, he'd found something that could fill it. The 6 girls had names as unique as their personalities: Ava, Riley, Zoe, Joy, Emma, and Grace. Ben learned their names gradually, each name unfolding like a small, precious secret as he listened to their stories, piecing together the fragments of their lives. Each had their own fears, quirks, and a distinct spark of resilience. Together, they formed a patchwork family, bonded by grief and a shared determination to survive. Ava, the eldest at 14, was already burdened with a protective instinct far beyond her years. She held the other girls close, her eyes flashing with a defiant strength, as though daring the world to test her. Riley, a shy girl with a love for drawing, often looked away, retreating into herself whenever adults entered the room. Zoe, curious and restless, seemed to hold questions about everything and everyone. Joy, an athletic girl with a spark of fire in her eyes, was the most outspoken and wouldn't hesitate to speak her mind. Emma, quieter, found comfort in singing softly to herself. And then there was Grace, the youngest, who still didn't understand why her world had been turned upside down and clung to Ava like a lifeline. Ben spent hours listening, offering them small reassurances as he tried to make them feel safe. But as he looked into their eyes, he could see the weight they carried: fears, uncertainties, and a longing for stability that no child should ever have to bear. A quiet voice inside him began to insist that it wasn't enough to offer them comforting words and send them away. They had already lost so much. Would sending them into an unknown system break their spirits even more? One by one, they shared memories of their parents. A song their mother would sing, a lesson their father taught them, small traditions they kept. Ben could see the ache in their faces, the awareness that those moments were now only memories. Yet, within that pain, they held on to one another, each a small beacon of hope for the others. As dawn approached, Ben knew he had a choice to make. They needed more than a temporary shelter. These girls needed a home, someone who would understand them, protect them, and stand up for them against a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. A decision was forming in Ben's mind, one that went against all logic and convention. But as he watched the girls huddled close, some drifting into uneasy sleep, he realized that his life would never be the same. He felt it, a deep, instinctual pull toward them, an urge to fill the emptiness within his own heart by giving these girls the family they'd lost. He would do whatever it took to keep them together. The decision weighed heavily on Ben, consuming his thoughts during his late-night patrols and quiet mornings alone at home. Adopting one child was a life-altering responsibility, but 6? And these weren't just any 6 children. They were Black girls who had grown up in a world different from his, with unique needs and challenges he could barely begin to understand. But as days passed and social services began planning their futures, Ben's heart grew restless. The girls would be split up and placed in foster care across various counties. To him, this felt like a betrayal of the fragile trust they'd placed in him that first night. He saw the fear in their eyes whenever he left, a fear that they might lose one another too. The thought of that was unbearable. One evening, Ben met with his closest friend and colleague, Officer Mark, hoping for advice. But Mark's reaction wasn't what he'd hoped for. "Ben, you're talking about adopting 6 girls. 6 Black girls at that. You'll be under scrutiny like never before. Do you really think you can handle this? Parenting alone is hard enough. And people, well, they might not accept this." Ben understood the underlying worry. He'd considered the raised eyebrows and whispers, the doubts his friends and colleagues might harbor about a white man raising Black children. And he was a single man, with no family of his own to help shoulder the weight. But the alternative, letting them be separated, letting the world's indifference tear apart their last connection, was unthinkable. As he struggled, his thoughts returned to Emily, his wife. She had always believed in the power of family, of love beyond blood. He could almost hear her voice, gentle yet firm, urging him to follow his heart, to do what was right, not what was easy. And for the first time in years, Ben felt that he was meant for something greater. Finally, Ben made the decision. He went to the social worker's office, a resolute look in his eyes. "I want to adopt them, all 6, he declared, his voice steady, his heart pounding. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm committed. I want to keep them together. They've already lost enough." The social worker looked at him in shock, then hesitated, glancing through the paperwork. "Mr. Lawson, this is highly unconventional. The process will be rigorous, and many won't support you. Are you prepared for that?" Ben's jaw tightened. He knew the challenges, but he also knew he had a rare chance to make a difference, to heal his own wounds by helping these girls find a safe, loving home. "Yes," he replied. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes." And just like that, a path was set. Ben was no longer just Officer Lawson. He was now a man ready to become a father in every way that mattered. He wasn't sure where the road would lead, but he knew one thing. He'd found his purpose. He would protect these girls, guide them, and build a family that could withstand any storm. Adopting the girls was only the beginning. Ben quickly discovered that his visions of an instant, happy family were far from reality. The girls brought with them habits, routines, and memories that filled their days with both tension and tender moments, yet they remained guarded. For them, trust had to be earned, not given freely. Ben's first major challenge was learning the small, practical details of being a parent. School lunches, laundry, and bedtime routines became daily hurdles. He spent one evening struggling to braid hair, only to have Joy, the outspoken one, laugh and say, "You're hopeless, Mr. Ben." She ended up teaching him, her fingers quick and skilled, as he watched, both embarrassed and in awe. But it was more than just the tasks. It was the emotional distance he felt. The girls missed their parents and clung to memories that he, an outsider, couldn't share. Some nights, he heard Ava, the oldest, whispering lullabies to Grace, the youngest. Other nights, he'd hear Emma's soft singing, an echo of her past life that seemed to comfort her. These moments reminded him of how far he still had to go to truly connect with them. Despite his efforts, the girls struggled in their own ways. Riley often withdrew into her art, covering pages with lines and colors that expressed feelings she wouldn't speak aloud. Zoe, curious and restless, seemed to test every boundary he set, challenging him to earn her respect. And Ava, strong, protective Ava, remained distant, treating him as a stranger, perhaps fearing that he too might leave. Ben faced his own internal battles. As a single, white man raising 6 black girls, he knew he was under a microscope. He'd overheard whispers at the grocery store, sensed the judging glances at school events. Friends who'd once welcomed him now seemed cautious, uncertain, and while he brushed off the comments, he could feel the toll it was taking on him and the girls. They, too, picked up on the unease, and it made their adjustment even harder. But amidst the struggles, small victories emerged. One Saturday, he took them to a local festival, hoping for a day of laughter. Joy, with her boundless energy, ran ahead, pulling Emma along with her, and for a moment, Ben saw them smile, truly smile. Even Ava's guarded expression softened as she watched her sisters. That night, as they returned home, Zoe casually called him Dad. The word slipped out, surprising both of them. She looked away, embarrassed, but Ben's heart swelled. He realized that these small moments, these quiet signs of acceptance, were precious. They reminded him why he'd taken on this challenge and why he would keep fighting to break through the walls they'd built. Ben knew that healing would take time. He couldn't replace their parents or erase the pain they carried. But with each day, he hoped to show them that he wasn't just a temporary guardian. He was here to stay, willing to learn, willing to grow, willing to make mistakes, and most importantly, willing to love them unconditionally. Ben quickly realized that understanding the girls meant more than learning parenting basics. It required him to understand their roots, their culture, and the world they came from. One Sunday morning, he mustered the courage to bring the girls to a local black church he'd never visited before. His nerves were palpable, but as they approached the church steps, Ava reached over and held Grace's hand, offering him a small nod of support. They were in this together. Inside, the church was warm and alive, with gospel music filling the air and people dressed in bright, vibrant colors. Ben felt out of place at first, but as the choir began singing, the girls relaxed beside him, even swaying slightly to the rhythm. People around them greeted the girls warmly, and gradually, some of those greetings extended to Ben. He was a newcomer, an unexpected figure, but he was met with cautious smiles and nods of recognition. After the service, Ben found himself speaking with Reverend Davis, an older man with a gentle voice and wise eyes. Reverend Davis welcomed him and the girls, listening to Ben's story with compassion. "You're trying," Reverend Davis said, offering him a reassuring hand on the shoulder. "That counts for a lot. Keep showing up." With that encouragement, Ben committed himself to being present. Every Sunday, he and the girls returned to the church. They began attending community events, block parties, neighborhood fundraisers, even a local soul food festival. Each outing was a step, another chance for Ben to bridge the gap between his world and theirs. And though some community members still viewed him with hesitation, he began to gain allies. The girls noticed his efforts too. Riley, always quiet, started asking him to join her when she drew scenes of the church or neighborhood gatherings. Zoe, the questioner, probed him with inquiries about his own life and his reasons for attending these events. Each question felt like a small test, a way for them to gauge his sincerity. Then came the evening of the church's cultural celebration, a night filled with music, food, and traditional dances. Ben felt like an outsider, but he stayed, determined to be there for the girls. Watching the joy on their faces as they clapped along and danced made him feel proud. Ava, typically reserved, looked up at him during a song, her eyes softening as if she was starting to see him in a new light. By the end of the evening, Ben had learned more about the girls' cultural heritage than he'd ever imagined. More importantly, they had seen his willingness to learn, to immerse himself, and to try without pretense. Their guardedness began to dissolve, and mutual respect grew. For the first time, Ben didn't feel like a man raising 6 girls who didn't quite belong to him. They were his daughters. The community, though not fully welcoming yet, was beginning to see him as part of their world, and the girls were beginning to feel they could trust him to walk in that world alongside them. Years passed, and Ben found himself not just raising 6 daughters, but watching 6 unique lives unfold. Each girl began carving her own path, and Ben learned to appreciate the beautiful, complex individuals they were becoming. Ava, always the eldest and most protective, naturally grew into a leader. She was drawn to social justice causes at school, leading student groups and organizing events for change. Her voice was powerful, and her presence commanded respect. Ben watched her with a mix of awe and pride, seeing in her the strength that had kept her family together during those fragile early days. She was becoming a woman who would make an impact, and he made it his mission to support her every step of the way. Riley, on the other hand, found her expression through art. Her once shy demeanor blossomed as she poured her soul into sketches, paintings, and murals. She used her art to tell stories about her family, their journey, and her heritage. The walls of their home became a gallery of her work, a colorful testament to her evolving perspective. One night, Ben found her in the garage, surrounded by paints and canvases, deep in thought. She looked up, surprised, and said softly, "Thanks, Dad, for letting me be me." That simple statement meant the world to him. Zoe's path took her into the world of books. She devoured novels, poetry, and biographies, and often shared her thoughts with Ben, debating themes and ideas. Her curiosity was boundless, and she dreamed of becoming a writer one day. Ben encouraged her, spending evenings reading her short stories, which often featured their family as characters. "You're a storyteller, just like your mom was," he'd tell her, watching her eyes light up at the comparison. Joy channeled her boundless energy into sports, becoming a track star at school. Competitive and fierce, she loved the thrill of each race, pushing herself harder with each challenge. Ben spent countless hours at her meets, cheering until his voice was hoarse. After one race, Joy sprinted over to him, breathless and beaming. "I did it, Dad," she exclaimed, and he wrapped her in a hug, as proud as if she'd won the Olympics. Emma, with her quiet grace, found her calling in music and theater. She had a beautiful voice and a talent for performance, captivating audiences with her presence. Ben watched her shine on stage, moved by the confidence she exuded. One evening, after a standing ovation at her school play, she ran into his arms. "You're my biggest fan, aren't you, Dad?" she laughed, and he knew he always would be. Grace, the youngest, was the peacemaker. She had an uncanny ability to calm arguments and bring warmth to any situation. When tensions rose, it was Grace who diffused them with her gentle words. Ben saw in her a kindness that reminded him of Emily, and he cherished it. She was the glue that held them together, the quiet strength that reminded everyone what family truly meant. As each girl pursued her passions, Ben realized he was no longer a man raising a group of sisters. He was the father of 6 remarkable young women, each unique, each powerful in her own way. He had learned to see them as individuals, embracing their dreams, celebrating their strengths, and supporting them through their struggles. And through these experiences, their family bond grew stronger, weaving them together in a way that was unbreakable. Ben knew that each of his daughters would face challenges, that the world might not always welcome them with open arms. But he also knew that they had something precious, each other. Together, they were more than just a family. They were a force, and Ben was grateful every day to be a part of it. As the girls grew into young women, they began to face a harsh reality of the world around them: prejudice. It appeared in subtle ways at first: questions from strangers about their family, lingering stares, awkward silences when Ben was out with his daughters. But as the girls matured, the prejudice became harder to ignore and more painful to endure. One afternoon, Ava came home visibly shaken after an encounter at school. Her leadership in organizing a protest had earned her whispers of troublemaker from classmates and even some teachers. "They look at me like I don't belong," she told Ben, her eyes filled with frustration. "Like I don't deserve to have a voice." Ben held her close, assuring her that her courage and leadership were powerful and important, but he felt the sting of her pain. Joy, with her athletic ambitions, faced her own struggles. At a track meet, another parent had scoffed, "Isn't that the girl raised by the white cop?" The implication, the disregard, hit her hard. That evening, she lashed out at Ben, frustration and hurt spilling over. "Why do I always feel like I'm stuck between two worlds?" she demanded. "I'm black, but I'm raised in this house that doesn't feel like it fits. And people they judge me. They judge all of us." Her voice cracked, and Ben saw the weight of identity weighing down on his daughter. Ben's heart broke watching her struggle. He had known from the start that he couldn't shield them from everything, but seeing how deeply the world's prejudice cut into them hurt in a way he hadn't anticipated. That night, he stayed up late, reading about the complex identities that transracial adoptees navigated, trying to understand his daughter's experience more fully. The following Sunday, he took Joy for a long drive, hoping for a private moment where she might open up. After some time in silence, he finally spoke. "Joy, I know I'll never fully understand what it's like for you, but I want you to know this: you belong. Not just here, not just with me, but anywhere you want to be. No one has the right to make you feel otherwise." She stared out the window, her face tight with emotion. "I know you love me, Dad, but sometimes it's just hard. People don't see me the way you do. They see me as this kid who doesn't fit. They question why I'm even part of this family." Ben placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Joy, I will always be here to fight for you. I'll stand up to anyone who questions our family, anyone who makes you feel like you don't belong. I'm proud of who you are, every part of you." For a moment, Joy's tough exterior softened, and she leaned into him. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. In that small moment, Ben could feel the silent bond between them deepen. But his battle wasn't just at home. He began to advocate fiercely within the community, ensuring that the girls' school addressed incidents of racism and bias. He spoke with teachers, engaged with school boards, and made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate discrimination against his daughters. At times, this meant enduring criticism, sometimes from people he considered friends. But he wouldn't back down. He couldn't. Through it all, the girls began to see Ben not just as their father but as their ally, someone who would stand beside them through any storm. And despite the struggles, the doubts, and the pain, they grew stronger as a family. Ben's relentless support reminded them that while the world might try to limit their identities, they had the freedom and the strength to define themselves. In the end, it wasn't the prejudice that defined them, but the resilience they cultivated in response. They were a family, bound not by appearances or perceptions, but by love that ran deeper than the world's judgments. And that love, Ben hoped, would be their guiding light in the darkest of times. The news hit the family like a freight train. Ben was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. His world, once filled with the energy and resilience of his daughters, now seemed uncertain and fragile. The daughters he'd once rescued were now left facing the possibility of losing the one person who had been their rock, their protector, their father. For the first few days, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Ben, typically full of determination, found himself grappling with fear. Fear of leaving his girls, fear of their lives without him. But his worry turned to resolve when, one by one, each of the girls rallied around him, each determined to show their father the same unwavering support he had shown them throughout their lives. Ava, ever the leader, took charge of organizing his treatment schedule. She researched specialists, liaised with doctors, and set up a calendar for his medication, therapy sessions, and checkups. She handled everything with precision and control, refusing to let anyone see her fear or doubts. At night, she'd sit beside him, her hand firm in his, silently willing him to keep fighting. Riley used her art to bring light to their home, filling every room with paintings of bright, hopeful scenes. She hung drawings of their family, of moments they'd shared, scenes meant to remind him of their love. One evening, she shyly brought him a sketch she'd made of his face, lined and worn, but with the same kind eyes she loved so much. "You'll get through this, Dad," she whispered. "We all will." Her quiet strength filled him with a sense of peace. Zoe, ever the reader, pored over books and articles about cancer, looking for holistic ways to support his treatment. She'd come to him with herbal teas and dietary recommendations, determined to give him every possible chance. Her research comforted her, gave her something tangible to hold on to, and Ben could see how her knowledge gave her strength. "I believe in science, Dad," she'd say with a small smile. "And I believe in you." Joy, fierce and determined, became his fitness coach. She convinced him to go on small walks each day, holding his arm and talking about everything and nothing, just keeping him moving. She pushed him to exercise, even if it was just a few steps, and wouldn't let him give up. "Athletes don't quit, Dad," she'd tease him, "and you've got 6 cheerleaders rooting for you." Emma, his performer, became the light in their darkest moments. She'd sing softly to him in the evenings, her voice carrying through the house like a balm. Her laughter lifted everyone's spirits, and her performances became moments of escape for all of them. She'd look at him, her eyes shining, and say, "Dad, you're not going anywhere. Not if I have a say in it." Grace, the youngest and always the peacemaker, was his constant companion. She spent her days by his side, reading to him, holding his hand, or simply sitting quietly, her presence a steady reminder of love. She'd sit with him in silence, her gentle spirit bringing calm to his restless mind. "We're here, Dad," she'd say softly, "all of us." As the months passed, Ben found himself leaning on his daughters more than he'd ever imagined. And with each small victory, each milestone, he felt their love as a tangible force, one that carried him through even the darkest days. Through this journey, he saw the unique strengths they had developed over the years, qualities they had cultivated not just for themselves, but for each other. It was as if they had always been preparing for this moment, each bringing a piece of themselves to lift the family as a whole. Their family, once forged through loss and uncertainty, was now bound together more fiercely than ever by the strength of love and resilience. Ben realized that he was no longer their sole protector. They protected each other, and in that knowledge, he found a peace he had never known. After months of treatments, small victories, and unwavering support from his daughters, Ben's cancer finally entered remission. The entire family felt as if a weight had been lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they could all breathe a sigh of relief. To mark this new beginning, the girls decided to honor Ben with a celebration, a tribute to his life, his strength, and his love. They organized everything with meticulous care, keeping most of the details a surprise. Ava took the lead, coordinating with their local church and community center to host the event. Riley designed the invitations, pouring her heart into each hand-painted card, making sure each one told a story of their family. Zoe took on the task of writing a speech, capturing their family's journey and the impact their father had on each of them. Joy, Emma, and Grace spread the word, reaching out to friends, family, and neighbors, inviting everyone who had been a part of their story. On the night of the celebration, Ben arrived at the community center, surprised to see the place filled with friends, family members, and even people he hadn't seen in years. The once skeptical members of the community, those who had questioned his decision to adopt 6 black girls, were there too, having witnessed his journey and come to admire the family he had built. The girls had transformed the space into a warm, welcoming haven, with photos lining the walls, snapshots from their life together, pictures of their early days, of school graduations, of family holidays and quiet, joyful moments at home. Riley's art adorned the walls, capturing memories and brushstrokes that spoke of love, resilience, and unity. As the evening unfolded, each of the girls stood up to speak, one by one. Ava spoke first, her voice steady and confident as she described how Ben's guidance had shaped her into a leader, showing her the power of standing up for what she believed in. Riley shared her gratitude for a father who saw beauty in her art, encouraging her to share her vision with the world. Zoe's words brought tears to Ben's eyes as she thanked him for nurturing her mind and always supporting her curiosity. Joy talked about the strength he'd inspired in her, the tenacity he'd shown, which she now carried within herself. Emma sang a song she'd written just for him, her voice full of emotion, expressing the joy and warmth he had brought into her life. And finally, Grace, holding back tears, shared how Ben's love had taught her that family wasn't about appearances but about the heart. After the speeches, the girls surprised him with a final reveal: the Ben Lawson Foundation. Named in his honor, the foundation's mission was to support foster children and adoption efforts, ensuring that kids in need of a loving home would have a chance to find one. Ben was speechless. He looked around the room, seeing faces of friends, neighbors, and even former foster kids who had benefited from his advice and support over the years. The foundation was a testament not just to his love for his daughters, but to the values he held closest to his heart. Moved beyond words, Ben took the microphone to address the crowd. "I never imagined my life would take this path, but it's been the greatest journey I could have hoped for," he began. His voice choked with emotion. "These girls, they've given me a purpose, a family, and a reason to keep fighting, and I'm so grateful for every single one of them." The crowd erupted in applause, and for a moment, Ben simply stood there, looking at the faces of those who had become a part of his family's journey. The community, once hesitant and filled with doubt, was now united in celebrating the life he had built, a life dedicated to love, resilience, and hope. As the evening wound down, Ben stood with his daughters, the 6 young women who had come to define his life. They were a family not by blood but by choice, bound together by love and loyalty. And as he looked at them, he knew that his legacy would live on, not just through the foundation, but through each of them, carrying forward the message that family, above all, was a matter of the heart. It was a quiet afternoon when Joy pulled Ben aside, her eyes shining with a blend of excitement and nervousness. She took his hands in hers, her fingers trembling slightly. "Dad," she began, her voice filled with emotion, "I have something to tell you. I'm going to be a mom." For a moment, Ben was silent, processing her words. Then his face broke into the widest smile Joy had ever seen. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his laughter bubbling up in sheer joy. The thought of becoming a grandfather was both exhilarating and humbling. His heart swelled with pride, knowing that this child would be born into a family built on love, resilience, and unity. As the months went by, Ben found himself lost in reflections on the past. The journey they'd shared had shaped not only him, but each of his daughters. In an effort to capture these memories, he began writing a memoir, piecing together the story of how they became a family. Each word he wrote carried a piece of his heart, a message to future generations that family was a choice, an act of love, and a bond far beyond mere blood ties. The process of writing allowed Ben to relive the countless moments that had defined their journey together. The day he'd first met the girls, the challenges they'd faced as he learned to braid hair and attend dance recitals, the look of pride in Ava's eyes at her high school graduation, the tearful embraces shared during his cancer battle, and the strength they had shown him at every turn. His memoir wasn't just a tribute to his daughters. It was a testament to the belief that family could be created by anyone willing to love fiercely. One evening, after months of writing, he gathered the family together to share the completed manuscript. They all sat in a circle in the living room, the fire crackling softly as they listened to passages from their shared history. Tears were shed, laughter filled the room, and together they relived the journey that had brought them from strangers to family. The family's story, bound in the pages of Ben's memoir, was a gift he hoped would inspire others. He wanted people to see that love could overcome any obstacle, that families could be forged from choice and commitment rather than simply blood. As Joy's due date approached, excitement filled the house. The sisters took turns making plans for the baby, sharing tips, buying little gifts, and imagining the newest addition to their family. And when the day finally came, Ben waited anxiously with his daughters at the hospital, his heart brimming with anticipation. Hours later, Joy emerged, holding a tiny bundle swaddled in a soft blanket. She looked at her father with tears in her eyes, then gently placed her newborn son in his arms. Ben's hands trembled as he cradled the baby, overwhelmed by the realization that his family's story had come full circle. This child, born into a family created by love, would grow up surrounded by sisters, aunts, and a grandfather who had taught them all what family truly meant. In the years that followed, family gatherings became frequent, filled with laughter, stories, and the inevitable chaos of a growing family. Ben watched as his daughters thrived, each carrying forward the lessons they'd learned together. And as he looked around the room, at his daughters and his grandson, he knew that his legacy of love would continue through them, shaping the next generation in ways he could only imagine. In his final words to his memoir, Ben wrote, "Family is not a matter of blood, but of heart. It is the choice to love, to commit, and to cherish." I hope that, through this story, others may see that family is something we build together, brick by brick, with each act of kindness, each sacrifice, each shared moment of joy and sorrow. This is our legacy. This is what it means to be a family. As the last chapter closed, Ben knew that their story had only just begun, its roots growing deeper with each new life, each new love, each new generation. And in that moment, he felt a peace unlike any he had ever known, his heart full, knowing that their family's love would carry on long after he was gone.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.